Hi, fourth graders. I'm here this week to teach you your reading skill. It is our last reading skill of fourth grade. This week we are going to be focusing on figurative language. So your learning target is I can identify examples of figurative language. Identify, remember, means find. So you'll be given examples or you'll be finding examples within a story. And you'll need to be able to tell your teacher what type of figurative language it is. Let's start by talking about what is figurative language, so then we can go back and be able to find it. Figurative language is when I say something or write something and it's not its literal or true meaning. We use figurative language because it makes our reading and writing more fun and interesting. So what I mean by not literal meaning is, one example is one that kids know a lot, is if I say it's raining cats and dogs. That's figurative language. It's an example of a figurative language, but I know that there's never actual cats and dogs falling out of the sky. It just means that it's raining a lot. So that means it's not literal. There's not cats and dogs. It's not true that there's cats and dogs, but cats and dogs does mean that it's raining a lot. So it means almost something different than what I'm saying. Let's go through some examples. Remember to take some notes. Pause your video whenever you need to in order to get some of these examples of figurative language done. Our first one is simile. You have done this one before, and a simile is when I compare things using like or as. So my example of this is she was tall like a giraffe. I'm comparing her to a giraffe. And I'm saying that she's as tall as one. I didn't say tall as, I said tall like. I could say either one for it to be a simile. Remember, if I use that word like or as, that automatically makes it a simile when I'm comparing two things. You could also say somebody's eyes were blue like the sky, or things like that. You don't always have to be explaining things as height or big or small. It could also be things like colors and descriptions like that. So remember though, you always have to be comparing things. If I just say, I like pizza, that's not a simile because I'm not comparing anything in that sentence. The next one that kind of goes along with simile is a metaphor. Metaphor is very similar because I'm still comparing two things, but I'm not using the word like or as. My example would be, the snow is a white blanket. I don't say it's white like a blanket. I didn't say the snow is as white as a blanket. I just said the snow is a white blanket. Again, that's not its literal meaning. I can't go out and pick up the snow and wrap it around me like a blanket. It's a way to describe the snow that makes it more fun and interesting, which makes it figurative language. Like I said, those two usually go together because in both of them we're comparing two things. Our next one is one that I know we've talked about when we did those tall tree poems based on that book that we read. We were comparing the tree and saying words almost as if it was a human. That figurative language is personification. I know in my class we talked about how that word person is inside of it, and that helps us remember what it means. Personification is when I give human-like qualities to non-human objects. So remember, qualities are like ways I can describe it almost. My example is, the sun touched the ground. Touching things is something that a human can do. The sun doesn't have fingers, it can't actually touch things, but I can describe it as if it's a person, using personification, and say the sun touches the ground, and what I really mean is that it's shining on the ground. I don't actually mean the sun has hands and it's reaching out and touching it, because remember, figurative language is not a literal meaning. We only have two more examples of figurative language today. So remember, simile and metaphor are comparing things. Personification is kind of when I pretend like something that's not human is human. Our next one is going to be hyperbole. Okay, and a hyperbole is an extreme exaggeration. It is usually things that we actually say a lot of hyperboles in a day. One example is, I died of embarrassment. If you say that, that just means that you are really embarrassed, but not that you actually died of being embarrassed. So it'd be exaggerating or kind of being extra or over the top about something. It doesn't seem that crazy for us because we use hyperboles a lot that sometimes it's hard for us to identify them. Another example could be, it was the best pizza ever. If I say ever, I really mean in the history of the world, it's the best pizza ever made. And that might not be true. It just means that I really liked that pizza. A lot of times in hyperboles that we will see, there's a lot of the best ever or the worst ever as an exaggeration. Our last one example of figurative language for today is going to be an idiom. An idiom is a phrase with a non-literal meaning. And usually idioms are tied to certain cultures or languages. So some things that you would say in English that are an idiom might not be in another language. One example of this would be if I say, that's a piece of cake. I don't mean anything about cake. Really, if I say it's a piece of cake, all I mean is that was really easy. If I say something like, when pigs fly, it doesn't have anything to do with pigs. It really means that it's never going to happen, most likely. Okay? So idioms are kind of tricky because another example would be like I gave before with it's raining cats and dogs. That's an idiom as well. It has nothing to do with cats and dogs. It has something to do with a lot of rain. So idioms are really tricky because I can know everything about cake, but if I use the phrase piece of cake, I'm never going to know that it means easy unless I've heard that before. Just like when pigs fly, if I said something crazy would happen and somebody else said, that will happen when pigs fly, I could know everything about pigs and never know what that idiom means. So idioms can be very tricky because it's very hard to use clues in the text to know what they mean. We just kind of have to hear them a lot in order to know what they mean. Remember, this week is all about figurative language. I know there's a lot of examples of figurative language, but we're going to focus on these 5 for right now. Make sure you go back in the video and pause and take some notes if you need to. And don't hesitate to email any of your teachers if you have questions. Figurative language can be tricky because there's so many different examples of it. Remember, my examples that I gave are just 1 or 2, and you have a lot more to pull from. If you have your Storytown book at home with you, you can also go to page 751, and there's more examples of each of these types of figurative language. We hope to hear from you soon. Good luck on your assignments, and send them to your teachers when you're done.